Dr. Sarah Phelps, Director of Computer Science and STEM, and Emily Poole, CS STEM Professional Learning Specialist, lead the Learning Technology Center's efforts to expand computer science and STEM education across Illinois. Dr. Phelps, with a Doctor of Education and background as a teacher, coach, and elementary CS STEM specialist, is a leading advocate for K-12 STEM access and active in Illinois ECEP and CSTA Illinois. Emily Poole brings over 20 years of teaching and 4 years of instructional coaching experience, designing professional development, curating resources, and supporting program implementation. An ISTE certified educator with a master's in educational leadership, Emily is passionate about technology integration for effective learning. Welcome, Sarah and Emily. And I'm Linda, your webinar facilitator. I'll be behind the scenes, making sure that everything runs smoothly, as well as interacting with you in the chat. So let's get started.
Hello, everybody. Happy Wednesday afternoon. All right, well, we are going to jump right in. We are so excited for you to be here. As the intro video said, I'm Dr. Sarah Phelps, and I have my amazing colleague, Emily Poole, on with us today. And we are going to be doing all kinds of discussion around the Thinker's Toolkit. What we really want you to walk away with today is this idea of how computational thinking and computer science can fit into every classroom. All right, I'm sure if you haven't found yourself saying these words out loud, you might have found yourself thinking it. I know Emily and I absolutely, when we work with teachers or we interact with teachers, we hear a lot of these kind of laments. My students aren't critical thinkers. They don't demonstrate any sort of problem solving. I feel like I have to break everything down for them. They aren't able to, critically think through a problem or something. A simple task seems like it needs a whole lot of support from me, the teacher. A lot of times teachers feel like students don't even try to ask questions. They give up easily, or they're just lost and don't really know how to even proceed to get the help that they need. They don't ask for help. They kind of just stagnate. And we also kind of hear the complaint that I just don't think my students know how to think. Hopefully today we have some objectives for this overall for this webinar. And while we're going to really seek to tie computer science in here, we're really going to look at computational thinking and the value that it has even more than just in computer science, but throughout your entire curriculum. So we're going to start off today. We're going to dig into what computational thinking even means. We're going to really see the basics of computational thinking and where we can identify computational thinking in our everyday lives, even as adults in our day-to-day jobs and our day-to-day tasks and things that we do around our house. So once we really have a good understanding of computational thinking, we're going to look at how computer science really supports the development of computational thinking skills and some of the really great strategies that we use in computer science to develop and hone computational thinking. But then we're really going to hopefully bring it all together with how we can build thinkers in every subject by utilizing the computational thinking strategies, as well as some really great engaging computer science activities and skills.
Excellent intro, Sarah. So, I just realized our X is in the way up there, but that's okay. We're going to cross that out anyway. So Jeanette Wing, who is kind of the lead person who came out with the idea of thinking, and she had a long researchers, and those folks might have, it was that these calculating problems and their solutions so that we can form and they can be carried out by a I crossed it out so I can't see it, processing agent. Really, if we break that down, what we're looking at thinking is that computational thinking is really just help our students and even ourselves to problem solve and to be for a long time, especially stepping into this computation or into this computer science realm, I overcome computational thinking. It sounds big. It sounds, like, oh, I have to do all these things, but it's not really that difficult. There are a lot of ways that we can apply this through computer science and in our classrooms. And we're going to show you concrete skills or strategies that you or your to apply almost any problem. If you're thinking about math word problems, yep. You want to think about science and understanding some of the life cycles or processes. Yep, it works there. How about in an English classroom? Sarah, I bet you can guess the answer on this one.
Absolutely.
What about even if you're trying to troubleshoot your car? Yep, these strategies would actually work there. So we're glad today. And don't worry that we're not going to share our slide deck with you right now, but we are going to give you a great companion journal that you're going to walk away with, because we had way too many ideas than we fit into our time. And so we wanted to give you them all. So make sure you stick around till the end, and we'll be sharing that companion journal with you at the end. What is computational thinking? Let's dig right into it. We gave you the textbook definition, but what does it really mean? What are those 4 critical pieces?
All right. So when we look at kind of the most commonly reported elements of computational thinking, you'll see lists that have a few more things, but these are kind of like the 4 most basic and most commonly associated computational thinking skills that you're going to see throughout. The first one is decomposition. So when we think about decomposition, we think about breaking things down, right? So we see decomposition in a lot of different subject areas. I taught 4th grade, and I know that decomposition was definitely a concept that I helped students understand in science, of course, but we definitely saw decomposition in numbers and in words in math and language arts. Pattern recognition is a really important computational thinking concept where we look for patterns, whether that is in a numeric pattern or a non-numeric pattern. We see patterns literally in everyday life. Patterns, things like the sun coming up and the sun going down, right? We have patterns in the things that we see as far as looking for data. We as teachers even look for patterns in maybe how did students do on an assessment so that we can find things that were maybe like commonly misunderstood or we need to do some reteaching. Abstraction is probably a little bit the most maybe or I should say the least familiar of the concepts. When we think about abstraction, we're thinking about looking at a big picture and kind of taking in what is most important and maybe setting things aside that aren't as important to solving a problem. So abstraction is really nuancing and digging into the fine details that are critical for us to tackle a big problem that we're trying to solve. And then finally, we have algorithms or algorithmic design. This is where we start to come up with a plan to solve the problem steps, kind of like your recipe or your step-by-step guide, how-to guide to accomplish a task.
And I always think about the algorithm design too, as our brains actually don't like to work that hard. And so we work hard in the beginning to understand, to figure it out, and to make that recipe or that understanding pathway. And then we learn how to repeat it through those patterns, and they all work. But pop up in real world too.
Very much so. So if we think about medical professionals and we consider those 4 computational thinking strategies or skills, doctors use patterns regularly, right? You come in, they look at some of the symptoms that you're having, they take those and they apply them, and they say, okay, other patients with these exact same symptoms, these patterns of symptoms typically are, going to be diagnosed with this maybe this disease or this ailment. We definitely have to do some abstraction, right? If I come in, they're going to have to identify what is actually a symptom that is causing me to be sick versus maybe something that's unrelated. They're going to decompose my symptoms to see if they can figure out what is actually the root of all of the problems, right? And then they're going to propose an algorithm to solve my problem. Maybe that's going to be a course of antibiotics, or maybe even further medical treatment or testing. But there's going to be kind of a series of steps to get me back to feeling healthy again. If we explore maybe another example, so we have agriculture and farming. Again, we see these applications of these computational thinking in ag, in farming. Fun fact, my son is a freshman in high school today. He went to learn how to horse judge. So they went and they looked at different horses, and they had to look at some of the things, those characteristics. They had to kind of take that horse and they had to decompose that horse into different characteristics. They had to abstract, again, looking for those critical things that help him kind of judge and apply a score to the horses. It's a pretty fun little timely example. But we also look at farmers when they look at other things related to crops or their animals that they take care of, right? We look at patterns in the almanac that tells us and helps us know when to plant and when to do certain things for our crops or our fields. We have to decompose issues that we might be having with our crop. I'm a terrible gardener. I definitely have to use my critical thinking and my computational thinking skills sometimes, because none of my plants ever are doing very well. So I have to abstract out the reason that those plants are not thriving. Usually it's 100% human error, but we use these skills to solve problems broadly. These are not when we think about ag and we think about medicine, computer science is not our first thought, but those computational thinking skills still apply. They still allow us to solve those tricky problems, right? Those tricky problems that we just don't have a clear or obvious answer to. Emily, you want to think about business and finance for us?
Sure. I moved you on. Sorry, you were still, I was excited about the horse, and then
okay.
I overclicked for that. But all industries. So we've already touched on medical, we've talked on agriculture, even be in pieces where we're talking the strategy, the intelligence, any of those kind of things. It might influence how you're using data that your business or the financial organization needs to make. You might model. This comes through in your risk assessment. You might be wanting, what is to do something to achieve those different goals. So our purpose and what we're sharing, we're computer science, STEM, we love all of that, but what we really love broadly is students thinking. All of these strategies work across all of these fields, all of these places, because at the root of all of them, this is computational. And so looking at in 2025, came out, and what you can see here is in the top 10, 7 of those different skills are related to things that you could practice or opportunities your students might have in the way. Analytical thinking, that's really just, we like to throw different words on things, but kind of the same thing. We're collecting and examining information, complex problem. Sounds a lot like an algorithm thinking, or it might even be that position where we're breaking it down so that we can make those logical conclusions, decision making. This report, which came from yardstick.com, is an additional piece that came from yardstick.com where they were looking at this is work and the things that we're seeing with computational thinking. They're not that businesses and organizations are increasing the type of interview questions from their future employees. And if we look at our students, workers, future workforce, in those, they are looking for students that don't just give the answer, but they want employees who are going to solve the problems. They want them to approach them methodically, notice the patterns, or even to eliminate noise so that they can focus on what's the most important part of that. Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you said something really critical there that, we know this is a common thing that we talk about in education. We're preparing students for jobs that don't exist yet, right? We know that technology is really, really speeding up progress in what jobs are going to be available and what jobs students are going to be expected to be proficient at. So when we start to think about what can we equip our students with to really ensure that they're future ready, it is going to be these skills that allow them to solve problems. They're going to be skills that are transferable no matter what new technology is out there and what new requests are being made on these students. They're going to have to be resilient, and they're going to have to be able to have a toolbox of just approaches to tackling big unknown problems. And we want to be able to really empower them. I know a lot of times when we have those students who are really uncomfortable in those situations, like we talked about earlier, like asking questions or solving their own problems, it's because we haven't really empowered them or taught them how to be those critical thinkers. I know when I was a classroom teacher, I oftentimes wanted to really make sure my students were getting things, but that oftentimes then translated to me not providing them with the skills to solve their own problems. I was out there helping them solve the problems. I don't want to help solve their problems. I want to help them solve their own problems. How about that?
Yeah, and when we were in the planning for this session, something else amazing that she said is, as we're looking at our future workers or even in our students in our classroom, we don't want them just to produce the answer. We want them to ask, work, solve, and we want them to have that continuum of problem solving and resilience. So, all right, in today's digital and data-driven world, computational thinking is increasingly emerging as a critical skill. We don't actually have planned to talk about here, but we definitely could slide that in there as well, as that critical thinking and understanding it ties into our students' understanding about AI as well. And so when we think about this, these tools are going to help engage our students in thinking about digital products, how they're going to be programming, how they can express their ideas, and the benefits that they can give to the real world. Students, it's another way to put them in the driver's seat rather than just being consumers of technology. They can become in the driver's seat, be the ones doing something with the technology to make the world a better place. Quick puzzle, a chat to those of you that are out there, we're going to give you a little bit of work here, is we're going to go ahead and share a situation that you might encounter as a teacher. And we want you to think about in your real world role, that's a tongue twister. In your role, what computational thinking skills do you think that you might use to solve this problem? So here we go. Let's see. Oh, I'm clicking, but a teacher has a student who is showing less than satisfactory performance on math quizzes. What computational thinking strategies would you use to be able to solve that? Let's see. I'm giving a few minutes.
Okay, good. I was going to say, do we have a multiple choice for them? Yes, we do. We have at the top. So decomposition, pattern recognition. Would you use some abstraction? Maybe algorithmic design. How are we going to solve this problem of maybe students aren't quite scoring what you would hope on your most recent math test or quiz?
All right, we'll get them to keep thinking about that. How about this one? And this is just kind of, you can imagine and see where computational thinking might fit in. Imagine you're the operating manager for a 2-day musical. Sounds like fun. 50 bands, 3 stages, and expected 1,000 people. This is a real world, things. You need to create a master schedule. can you optimize travel and do all of those things? What skills would you use? And because we have so much to share, we're going to keep on moving. But think about those and see how how computational thinking would work in that. All right, moving on. Sarah, you want to get us started on this part?
I am ready. All right. So like we mentioned, while computational thinking is not exclusive to computer science, it is definitely something that we find very naturally in computer science. Obviously, computer and computational have the same root. Computational thinking is that mimicking how a computer thinks. So we want to be able to help our students see that connection. And computer science has some really amazing opportunities that we're going to share with you. Like, how can we build up computational thinking in computer science? All right. So before we get too far, though, let's do just a little bit. Let's do our own here, little abstraction and decomposition practice here. What do we mean when we talk about computing and computer science and computational thinking? I know that's a big question oftentimes that we tackle when we're having conversations around what teachers are doing in the classroom related to technology. When we think about computing, that's kind of the broadest sense of using technology in education, right? Computing is the use and study of computers, like in a general way, right? Like just for every purpose, every reason, it is when we use computers to manage, process, and communicate information. That could be anything from designing a website to making a Google Doc, right? It's pretty broad, and that's why it is all encompassing. In Illinois, we have computer science standards to help guide some of this. We have computer literacy continuum, but it is just all encompassing how we use devices and computers. Now, to really differentiate the difference in skills that we're talking about today between computer science and computational thinking, then we go a little bit deeper. So when we introduced computational thinking on the slides just a few slides ago, remember, that is that strategy or way of thinking about and solving complex problems, sometimes involving technology, but not always. Computational thinking can be applied to situations outside of technology. When we get a little bit deeper and we think about computer science, we love a good Venn diagram situation. You can see that computational thinking absolutely overlaps with computer science, but it is not entirely encompassed. When we talk about computer science, this is the theoretical and practical study of how computers work, right? How the computers can do the things that we want them to do. This is where we see those more technical, in-depth standards come about, right? Like, how does my device actually function, even at the bits and bytes level? What is the difference between hardware and software? When we still apply computational thinking to that study, because that's how we can solve problems with technology, but it's not completely encompassed. Finally, this is the thing that I think most people actually believe computer science is, and that's programming. Programming is the set of instructions that we give, also known as code, to a computer so that it will actually do the task that we want. This is kind of a messy little diagram, but it definitely helps kind of differentiate and helps people see how we can have computational thinking outside of computer science, but we can also have computer science and computational thinking in harmony. And we need to use computational thinking as we use computer science to design solutions to problems that we see on the day-to-day, or our students might identify problems that they can solve with computers as well.
Yeah, and I love how you pointed out, Sarah, that program, everybody always thinks about, oh, I don't know how to code, I don't know computer science, but it than just that small. All right, so we're going to go ahead and share some of the strategies that are used by computer scientists and in computer science problems, or to get computational thinking in our students, because as teachers, that's our job, is to give them opportunities where they can practice these things. It's not just a one and done type thing. It's how do I set my students up in situations so that they can practice. And though we're going to be talking about them specifically in computer science ed, they broadly support persistence in our students, creativity, teamwork, and collaboration. And let's get into these three. We have debugging and remixing and pair programming. So is debugging. Have a little, meme on that one, just fits perfectly. The idea of debugging is really just finding and fixing a problem, which when we go back and think about those computational thinking strategies, finding and fixing a problem, we've had the same problem before, you might be using pattern recognition so that you can find it again. Or you might take time and abstract out what was the important thing, where does it seem to or have a problem in there, and causing that undesired outcome. You might also have to analyze and look at, or even have someone else come and help you with that, which can lead into rubber ducking. And debugging is talking about debugging. A rubber duck could be your rubber duck. And rubber ducking is just a fun computer science term where it's the idea that you a rubber duck, but also could be a friend that helps you to solve that. It's kind of like when I taught third grade and my students would write their essays or they would work through usually, and we would have a step where we would peer at, and as they would read aloud their essay, it was when they were reading it out loud, that's when they would hear their errors. And they'd be like, oh, I didn't mean to write that. And then they would be able to fix. Strategy in computer science is a great way to do that. All right. Sarah, do you want to tell them a little bit about Prim?
Absolutely. So another thing that we see as a really great strategy for helping support computational thinking in computer science is remixing. So the concept of remixing is actually finding a program that does something and kind of digging in. So the first step of remixing with the Prim method is to predict. So we look at some code and we say, I think that based on what I know about programming and what I see here, I'm going to predict this is what this program can do. The next step is to run that program and actually kind of observe and see, like, did it do what I expected it to do? If it did, awesome. If it didn't, what did it do instead? And can I kind of rectify why I thought something different was going to happen, right? I go back and I look at the code and I say, oh, that makes sense. I see why that worked the way it did. That's the investigate part. Then we actually empower students to modify. So taking this project or taking this program and making it their own. So kind of changing some factors. This is a really a chance for students to tinker with code. When we think of tinkering, we oftentimes think of like taking things apart in the real world, but we can do that with code too. Modifying it, maybe changing a value in the code or actually switching out blocks. And then ultimately that leads to students making something themselves. The value in this approach is that while we kind of sometimes think that that's cheating, right? Like students didn't have to do all the hard work of building the entire program themselves. What we actually find is this requires a lot of higher level thinking. So that evaluate, that's way higher on Maslow or on Bloom's. When we talk about synthesizing, right? Taking my thinking and putting it with somebody else's thinking, that's higher on Bloom's. Remixing actually can be harder for students because they are so used to their own process, right? The way that they do things. Emily was talking about debugging a second ago, and that applies to that as well. Students, at least my experience was, students hated debugging. They would much rather take all the code, even if there was only one small little error, and throw it all away and write it again completely from scratch themselves, than to take the time and to use strategies to actually work through the code to find the mistake. That same thing kind of happens when we do the remixing with Prim or with another strategy we're going to talk about in just a second. Students feel kind of uncomfortable digging in and evaluating the code and making those predictions. But that's good, right? We want to get them a little bit more comfortable with feeling uncomfortable, especially when it comes to something like this. So remixing is such an opportunity. It also gives them a chance to take something and run with it for inspiration. I know we've all heard, I don't know what to do, right? I don't know. When we use the remixing strategy, it empowers them by giving them lots of great examples and a starting place, but it also stretches their thinking as they have to dig into those higher order thinking skills to really figure out what else they could do with the code that's in front of them.
All right, let's on to the next one.
All right. Go ahead.
Do you want to, oh, sorry, I was stealing your.
No, that's okay. So in a similar vein, this is just a different strategy for remixing. This one actually may be a little bit more familiar because UMC and EDC are kind of more broadly seen throughout STEM in general and science classes as well. It's a similar concept to PRIM in the sense that we take something that's existing, right? Again, we're not starting from scratch. So we take a program that exists and we use it. We usually kind of explore maybe like what the creator says that the app should do. We can look at the little description or understand the purpose of the app. We use it, then we dig in under the hood. That's when we start to discover what's under there, modify it a little bit, maybe make some changes, some small changes at first, do some more observing, and then actually make maybe some big changes and eventually create our own. This is very similar to PRIM, but it's just another way to get students thinking about what is in front of them. What do they see? How do they believe it works? Evaluating actually how it works, doing some things to change it or to make it behave differently, again, observing, and then eventually empowering them to make their own version or their own program. This works so nicely with computer science because there's no materials, right? In a science classroom, if we give them a device and they rip it apart, and we have one less thing that we can rip apart. In a program, you can take things apart and there's no expense. We aren't down consumable goods. This is a really fun, easy way to allow students to tinker with something that doesn't have an actual cost. And it really helps students become empowered to figure out and how things work, which we love when kids are curious about how things work. How do they do the thing that they're seeing? They learn from the existing code and then they can make it their own.
And as they're looking at the pattern that's already there, it opens up those creativity channels for them to come up with new ideas and what they do that. And you might even see something like a remixing pop up in your ELA classroom.
Absolutely.
So pair programming.
Perfect.
Sarah, you go ahead.
Okay. So our last strategy for that we see oftentimes in computer science classes, and this I'm going to tell you is probably my favorite, is pair programming. So, and again, this is a strategy for computer science, but it absolutely is applicable in any classroom. And pair programming is all about students working collaboratively. Another skill that we know is hugely valuable and very much a critical skill that some of our students struggle a little bit with. In the concept of pair programming, we have two students working on one computational program and one computational device. So they actually share a robot or a computer. In this scenario, we have one student who is our driver. That is the person who is actually doing the task. So whether if we're doing it on a device, that might be clicking and dragging the blocks or actually managing the computer keyboard and typing in the code. The other person serves as the navigator. They are the one that's kind of directing what's happening on the screen. Now, they're not touching the keyboard, so they have to use their language to actually tell the driver where they think they should go and why they should do that. The beautiful thing about pair programming is both students are communicating constantly back and forth. You have this beautiful dialogue, this beautiful discourse happening. In my classroom, when we would pair program, I would tell the students, today, this classroom should not be quiet. It should be a constant conversation because as the driver is doing things, they're going to be doing those things, but also kind of articulating why they're doing them. So they might be saying, I'm going to drag that move forward block. The navigator should be part of that conversation. The navigator might say, yeah, I think that's a great idea. Or the navigator may say, I disagree. I think that you should do this instead. The rule in my classroom was you can't just say no. If you believe that something different needs to happen, you should say, I disagree. Here's why, or because. Driver, it's okay if you still believe that your solution is correct. You would say, well, here is what I'm thinking. That sounds like it would be kind of hard for students to do. It wasn't. It was amazing. Instantly, my students were having that discourse. And they were having very productive discourse. Sometimes they wouldn't come to a spot where they agreed. They would both be like, well, we both think it's going to do something different. And so then they would agree to try it out. Now we're back into our almost like our remixing skills. They would say, well, let's try it your way. And they would put the block or they would type the code in that they believed was going to be, that one of them believed was going to be the right solution. And they would observe. And then they would talk through what happened. Did it work? If yes, awesome. Did it not work? Okay, maybe we'll try the other approach and see if that works. Maybe neither of us were correct and we're back to the drawing board. What was beautiful about that interaction was they were sharing their thoughts. They were defending their thoughts, right? They were providing evidence and support as to why they believed that it was going to work. And that's why they were selecting those particular approaches or those select particular code. They had a built-in thinking partner. So sometimes, like I said, they didn't have a solution at all, but they didn't feel stuck. They would say, well, what do you think? What should we try? What could we try? And then they would work together. Pair programming had a person to help you when you were stuck, but also a person to celebrate with you when you solved a really tricky problem. This was one of those times where whenever my principal would come in, she was always just completely floored by the way that the students were talking. And I was too. They just naturally began to have this beautiful conversation about what was happening on their screen. And it was magical to see. Pair programming is really something that empowers students to tackle hard problems because they have that partner, that thought partner built in already.
And going back to why we're here, trying to build that thinker's toolkit, giving your kids opportunity and practicing in this really starts to build up that muscle. They can challenge each other. They can do all of these things. They just need to practice it.
Absolutely.
All right. So if we're looking at, Sarah, I'm stealing it. If we're looking at some tools that you might be familiar with or not, is a lot more than we can eat. But here are some that to the top of our list that you might want to use with your students to practice computer science explicitly and practice any of those skills. And if you are looking for more or you want to sort by your grade level or cost or different activities, we're going to encourage you to visit ltc.site/CSHUB, where we have a whole database. I can't even remember how many, well over, I think, 300 different resources that for teaching your students computer science and practicing those skills to think. Let's talk about integrating with others, because though computational thinking ties right in with computer science, as we said, it goes across every subject, giving purpose and connect. Adding to that, computer science doesn't stay in its own silo. It's also connected to all the other subjects. And the benefits that we see in adding these to our core subjects, especially if you are K-5, K-8, you might find that it's hard to find time to do computer science explicitly, but you might be able to easily integrate it within another core subject. So great things in adding these in. You're going to see enhanced problem solving opportunities for your students, deeper subject understanding. They're going to be applying the work and actually more with it. They'll be the ones doing the thinking. There's some digital citizenship skills that are going to be developed because they are navigating and doing the work in that digital space. And also metacognition, when they get that thinking during a little they are doing. We're going to look across all these different subjects based on how much time we have left. We're going to look at some ELA, science, math, social studies, PE, and also downtime that fits not really in any one of those specific. But we're going to show you some ways to bring it all together, because that's our favorite.
Absolutely.
It really is.
Absolutely. Since Emily and I both have instructional coaching background, one of the things that we always found a lot of joy in was finding ways to bring these computational thinking skills and a lot of the activities that we're going to share with you today into classrooms, because as Emily mentioned, not only are they a great way to build up these, critical thinking skills, but there's an engagement factor that is really also pretty impressive. Students like things that are novel, and you're going to see through some of our examples that they are the same content, and we're going to have the same instructional outcomes as far as the content that students will walk away knowing. But the engagement in the lessons is probably going to be just a little bit higher than some of our traditional approaches. I always would tell teachers, tell me the subject, the concept or the topic that you maybe you just don't love teaching anymore. Maybe it's something that the kids really struggle with, or maybe it's boring, right? We all have something that we teach that we're like, it's not my favorite. I teach it. It's my standards. I'm in charge of it. But there are other things I love to teach. This is just something I have to teach. Tell me that thing, and we will find an engaging activity with maybe a little bit of a computer science, computational thinking spice that will re-engage students and maybe even make you love teaching that topic too. How do we build computational thinkers in the classroom? A lot of our activities are going to fall into one of these approaches. So I've mentioned that term tinkering, right? Like taking something that's whole and taking it apart. Programs can be tinkered with, even physical objects, right? Like Lego takes that approach a lot of times, where students build something, but then they take it apart and really understand how it works. Creating. So sometimes we do ask them to create things from scratch. That really supports computational thinking. Debugging. We know that's a really important strategy, where they have something that's almost fully put together, but there's something that's not working. There's something that's wrong. So finding and fixing those mistakes or errors to fix the problem. Persevering is huge. The more students learn how to productively struggle, the more likely it is that they aren't going to just give up when they get to something that they aren't comfortable with or aren't familiar with, right? They're going to, instead of saying, I don't know, they're going to say, I don't know, but I want to, right? They're going to dig in. So giving them opportunities to tackle hard problems, but to overcome them or persevere, that is really going to help support all of the things that we've shared today. And collaborating. Sometimes it's scary to do hard things by yourself, but when you have a buddy, it makes it just a little bit easier. So these are things that you're going to see, again, that just naturally lend themselves with the processes that we've shared, with the concepts that we've shared. We can really start to amplify the activities and we're going to show you how it can directly link to the content areas that you are also trying to accomplish here. So let's start with some ELA. What can we do with ELA? So reading, writing, grammar, all spelling, anything related to language arts. Obviously, as we were sharing the computational thinking skills and strategies, you might have already started to think, you know what? The way that she described that actually makes me think about this content areas, different skills. Well, we did a little bit of that, breaking it down for you. So with ELA, we already see computational thinking when we teach cause and effect. Cause and effect is just like if else. In our programs, if we want our computer to do something when a certain condition is met, then we would use an if else. So if I press the enter button, then I want my character to jump, else it's not going to be jumping, right? So we see that naturally in language, in our literacy, in our stories that we share. Story elements, so the characters that make up the stories that we read students or the students read, are similar to the components that we see in our programs. Things like sprites, the backdrops are like the setting. So when we design a program in something like Scratch or Playlab, or not Playlab, Sprite Lab, we can associate those things. Students can take those elements and put them into programs. We look for patterns, right? Patterns is a really important computational thinking skill. Patterns show up in our programs as loops. We also find patterns in a lot of our language arts. Poems are patterns, right? We see genres as patterns. So when we read a story, we can identify particular elements that always are present in a specific kind of story, similar. So, fairy tales have a particular pattern that they follow. That's why they get lumped into that fairy tale group. When we ask students to do analysis, we're asking them to do things like writing an algorithm, right? A summary is basically an algorithm for a story. It is the steps or the events that took place in the story in order. We also ask them to debug or analyze, not only in literature, but you guys gave a lot of good examples about writing, right? Whenever we ask students to revise and edit, we're asking them to debug and look for those things that make their writing, that we can improve to make their writing better. Key details. I know I taught that in 4th grade, where we read a story and we had to identify the main idea, or we had to abstract out what was a key detail versus just a supporting detail that maybe wasn't as important. And then I know Greek and Latin roots are a major thing that are taught kind of K-12. When we're looking at words and we're looking at the parts of words, we're doing some really important decomposition. Those are just a few examples. There are a lot more examples than that, but we just wanted to show that natural overlap. So what can we do with ELA and computer science and computational thinking? Well, we could remix a story. So one of the things, as I mentioned, that we oftentimes see in literature is a pattern. So you can identify that pattern of a story. So Emily has the example here of different versions of the gingerbread man. We could ask students to take a story and remix it, maybe in a format like Scratch, where they actually create a new story where the story is interactive or the story runs itself in the Scratch platform. They have to identify the characters that they're going to include. They actually have to program the characters to interact just like the actual events in the story. They have to identify the setting that they're going to have, or multiple settings. And now they can take all those elements that they were learning about and they can incorporate them into a program. Similar concept, probably an activity that you've seen in the classroom before, just a little bit of a high-tech take on it.
Yeah, and we have many more examples in the companion journal. So take a look at those that we knew we had to cut out because we just knew we would run out of time. Now, math and computer science they seem like natural partners in crime. They are already, connected in so many different ways, but estimating, refining, functions, we see all of these things that are happening in math, and we can also connect right into computational thinking and with science. Let's jump right into some of the activities. Very excited about this one. This is in which loves some data when it comes to, I think it's kind of the unwritten hero inside of math, because it's really what we do with the numbers that matter. And we found this great resource here called Data Education in Schools, and they have a escape rooms. And in order to complete the escape room, there's a variety of different skills that your students will have to use their computational thinking and go through the challenges and figure that out to find out the answers. And again, this is a place where students can do the thinking. And when we go back to computational thinking and we want them to have the thinker's toolkit, we want them to do the thinking. So there we go.
Perfect. All right, let's talk about science, which really that beautiful data activity, there's a lot of really great tie-in with science there as well. But, science, again, very easy connections to computational thinking. Again, we got a lot of cause and effect happening in science, right? Why a particular thing happens in science. We have a catalyst that causes something else to happen. In classification in science. So we spend a lot of time identifying characteristics to put things in groups, whether we're classifying rocks or plants or animals. We are looking at conditions to be able to say, okay, this animal belongs in this group because of this and this and this. If it has fur, right, and it feeds its baby milk, then it's a mammal. We use those same concepts in computer science. Data collection is definitely very important in science. That's okay. We've got sensors that collect data. Not only do we just collect data, or use data, we actually in science can collect data using our devices. So we can take things like sensors and pull data about the environment and then use that data, which is pretty cool. Science also allows for simulations, which sometimes I know when I was teaching science, it was hard to actually give students a hands-on experience with certain concepts because it was not practical, money-wise, or it wasn't practical time-wise, or we didn't have access to something. Simulations in computer science or in a digital platform actually allow students to interact and let's go back to that word, tinker, in situations where they might not be able to, right? At the microscopic level. One of my favorite places to see simulations was from University of Colorado, the PhET simulations, where students could interact with like electricity safely, or rub a balloon on a sweater and watch the electrons move. Those are things we could rub a sweater, but we couldn't actually see the electrons moving in real life. But simulations allow us to dig in and actually understand what's happening. And students can start to use their computational thinking skills to really decompose those situations. And we can also amplify the excitement in presentations. We know students have to present information oftentimes in all of these subject areas. We can utilize technology like some of the things that we shared earlier to make those interactions or make those presentations a little more interactive. Here is a great example of a simulation. So we have some different we have the stages and students are able to, this is actually built in Code Studio. So a student was able to create a simulation of the growing stages, and they were able to make an interactive model of how a plant grows. This is something where students are demonstrating an understanding of these stages, but using technology. They could have drawn a poster, they could have labeled a worksheet, but instead they take that knowledge and demonstrate it by building a program.
And the one on top is a demonstration from a high school physics classroom where they were testing velocity and angle a ball would move. And that would be to test exactly how hard you throw precise measurements. So using a computer program might help out with that. In social studies, when we're looking at all of these different skills that we have to cover in a social studies classroom, we can learn directions in things like the cardinal directions through our coding, and we can have conditionals when we look at cause and effect of things through history, timelines, and chronological order. That's an algorithm looking through history. So here's a neat idea, and this was actually on the website Computational Thinking Lessons, where we could abstract, take out the details. What would we need to know to design a 3D Greek monument for someone that we were researching? Lots of information that the students would have to do. Also finding a purpose for them to create something. It's not just like, what will I make? It's, wow, I can study about this great God and this is how things work, and create it in something like a Tinkercad.
All right.
Specials.
One more group. We're kind of lumping all the specials together: PE, health, art, music, but we definitely see computational thinking in all of those areas, right? We know that students have to problem solve in those classes too. We also see them hopefully starting to recognize things like patterns, right? We have patterns in our music, but we also have patterns in art and movement. Lots of opportunity for games in all of those specials where students are thinking computationally, right? Strategy, how to accomplish their task. I know one of our favorite things to do in PE for students, especially when they were waiting in line, was Simon Said. So again, that if-then condition: if I say Simon, then you do the task that I just said. And things like algorithms and variables in dance and scorekeeping in the games that we're playing.
Yeah.
One of our favorite resources that we love to point people in the direction of is Microbit. And Microbit is such a perfect addition to a PE class because it's all about using sensors to collect data. And in this case, this is one where students could program their own pedometer. So it actually is something that they could program and then wear to measure their movement during a PE lesson or a PE class.
Yeah. And then we can even capitalize on the time that is considered your other time. When your students end up with a few minutes of free time, things like logic puzzles, Sudoku, those are all pieces that can really give our students that computational thinking practice time. So we've got some great links in there. The Crazy Dad website, great different resources you can find for all of that. Some schools have maybe even thought about having a computational thinking game night, because when we look at board games, there are a ton of computational exercises that we're asking our brain to do. All right.
All right, we're going to wrap it up here, but we want to just kind of teacher to teacher talk right now. We know that as you are trying to help your students grow and prepare for the future, one of the things that we are always trying to do is just really think about students and that independence, that autonomy that we want to develop. We want them to learn, and we want to be the person that helps guide them, but sometimes we end up doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And so as you are considering how computational thinking and computer science might fit into the subject area that you teach, we want you to really, at the heart of this, consider how can we get students to keep thinking, right? We want them to tackle problems with that productive struggle, that persistence. And we want to give them opportunities where there's not a clear answer. We want them to dig in, and we want them to explore. And every class has that potential. And there are lots of tools out there that can support that kind of exploration. And so we wanted you to take a page out of the playbook of my very favorite fictional teacher, Miss Friz. When Miss Frizzle, when a student asked a question in her class, she didn't just tell them the answer. They instead went on an adventure. We want every day to be an adventure. We want students to see learning as an adventure. And we can do that by using, hopefully, some of the strategies and approaches that we shared with you today.
Yes. And we'll just get quickly to this, is that children must be taught how to think, not what to think. And that goes back to giving them these opportunities to practice these kind of thinking strategies, giving them the opportunities in your classroom to think, to pattern, to decompose, to abstract, and create their own algorithms for thinking. And we promised you a companion journal, and you'll see that the link is right there. And I think Linda's going to pop that in the chat. And thank you for letting us share with you today.
Thank you both so much for being here to talk about computational thinking. It's such an awesome topic, and absolutely, I know when I started thinking about it, I was way overcomplicating it. But it's actually not that complicated once you start digging into it. And so this was a great way just to get our feet wet with some of those basic principles, and hopefully some good resources. Remember that we put in the chat the companion journal as well as the CSHUB on our website. So both of those are in the chat. Feel free to grab those before we end today. But otherwise, unless there are questions, which I don't see any in the chat, just a lot of people saying thank you so much and saying today was interesting. I'm going to go ahead and again extend a thank you both to Emily and Sarah. And I think we're going to close it out for tonight. So I hope to see you all on the next webinar. And thanks so much for being here.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.